must now prepare for a negotiation with the European Union.
We are determined to keep our unity as 27.
It was a noble idea for its time. It is no longer right for this country.
Hello and welcome to the special edition of the Newsmakers live from London with me, Imran Garda. Just over my shoulder, Big Ben has been chiming 7 p.m. on what has been an historic day for not only the people of London, but the people of Great Britain. Slightly more than half the population would be elated because they have voted to break away from the European Union. Slightly less than half would be dejected, disillusioned, disappointed. One could argue that both sides woke up this morning utterly shocked and very, very surprised. Not only has Britain decided to break away from the European Union, but Prime Minister David Cameron has tendered his resignation. He will step down within 3 months. It's been a massive day, lots of things to talk about, and we will tease out over the next hour all the various aspects of Brexit and just what it means. We begin the special Newsmakers coverage with Francis Collins.
There was no hiding the emotion. The short walk across Downing Street in London to an uncertain future for both the country and the Prime Minister.
The British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
The night before it appeared tight, but the Remain campaign seemed to have nosed ahead, if you believe the polls. Not for the first time, the political pollsters had created a mirage. The result they foresaw simply didn't happen. Throughout Middle England and in the north, the level of support for the Remain campaign was simply not enough.
There is simply no need in the 21st century to be part of a federal system of government based in Brussels that is imitated nowhere else on earth. It was a noble idea for its time. It is no longer right for this country.
It was a catch-all term that's now part of the political language. The Brexit, Britain's vote on an exit from the European Union and its ramifications. In truth, there's always been an awkward relationship with Europe, best summed up by Britain's wartime leader Winston Churchill, who said, "We are with them, but not of them."
Much of the debate was centred on London, but this city ceased to be representative of Britain many years ago. When you travel around the capital, you see so many nationalities, you hear so many languages, and perhaps these people are the forgotten ones of this referendum. Those from the European Union who live and work here.
Most of the Germans would like to have the Britons in the EU, so we're really sorry about that.
I had really the impression that the UK was that liberal country where, you know, everyone is welcome.
I think this is just such an emotional topic for people in Britain, and it doesn't need to be.
Right now it's a bit of a shock and a question mark of where's going to be my future.
There are 2.9 million citizens from other EU countries living in the UK. An estimated 270,000 came in last year and 85,000 emigrated abroad. A net EU migration of around 185,000. The figure spiked after the entrance to the EU of 10 new countries in 2004. There is no denying that fear of increased immigration was an issue in this campaign.
Across the world, people have been watching the choice that Britain has made. I would reassure those markets and investors that Britain's economy is fundamentally strong. And I would also reassure Brits living in European countries and European citizens living here that there will be no immediate changes in your circumstances.
This has been a campaign that at times barely seemed to have been about EU membership, but about British identity.
Sovereignty for me belongs to the people.
We're not against anybody, but we think it is irresponsible to have an open door.
At the moment, we have no control over our borders.
To keep blaming foreigners for all the ills of the world, I think that's a pretty horrifying...
They're performing an economic con trick on the British people.
It's exposed major differences of how the UK sees itself and its immediate future. The effects of this campaign on the UK will take time to be seen. The identity and future of the European Union itself is now harder to predict. Francis Collins, The Newsmakers.
Identity, economics, politics, geopolitics. So much to talk about. So many possible ramifications, both tangible and the intangibles. Nobody has a crystal ball. Everybody has an idea of what might be coming next. Denis MacShane joins me now, former UK Minister of State for Europe. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. What a day. Many feel, particularly those who wanted to remain, that the United Kingdom, the voters here, have cut off their nose to spite their face.
I think it's probably not wise. I mean, I'm no longer an MP, but you never insult the voters. The voters are never wrong, except, of course, when they're always wrong. It's not their fault. They've been told for 20-odd years by media oligarchs who don't live in this country but own all the press, don't pay taxes here, but dictate our opinions, that Europe is bad for them. They've been told by the Conservative Party. David Cameron, for 15 years, I used to debate with him in the Commons, was Eurosceptic, not a passionate outer, but Eurosceptic. He spent the last 15 weeks being pro-European, but perhaps people prefer the David Cameron of 15 years of Euroscepticism.
Yeah, but then you had Prime Minister Cameron, you had former Prime Minister Gordon Brown and so many others, even the celebrity machine, all pushing people to say, vote in, remain, remain. So there was also strong messaging from that perspective, right?
There was, but people remember Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. They were there for 13 years. Did they put in place protection for workers? Did they build new social housing? Did they use the existing EU social labour law directives to try and stop some of the negative aspects of it? The answer is no. Did they make the case for Europe? No. Gordon was always known as Red Line Gordon. You know, he always had red lines against anything coming out of Europe. Don't misunderstand me. That's commonplace throughout all EU member states. The national leaders of Europe don't quite know how to use Europe. They use it as a whipping boy, a scapegoat, somebody to blame. But when you actually have a chance in a vote to say, sort of almost give up yours to Europe on immigration, on bureaucracy, on anything you don't like, blame Europe. And that's what David Cameron did when he decided to use the plebiscite mechanism, the referendum mechanism. Mrs. Thatcher hated them, said referendums are a device of dictators and demagogues. And now Mr. Cameron engaged his honour, and he's lost his bet. He's out, and he enters into a very unhappy place in British political history.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about him later on in the programme. However, was he complacent? Did he think that this was never going to pass way back when he decided to strike that deal and, say, placate those on the right?
I've got just down there, out of camera shot, a book I published in January 2015 called Brexit, Why Britain Will Leave the European Union. And that was my warning to David Cameron. I like him personally. It was my warning to other political friends and still active in government and opposition. Hey guys, this can happen. And they ignored those warnings. They ran a very dull and inefficient campaign. They didn't work at it long enough. I mean, it's like landing at D-Day. You just don't sort of set sail from Eastbourne on June the 5th and land on June the 6th. It requires a year, 2 years of preparation. That wasn't put in place. And all the time, the populists, the people who said Turkey with 75 million people are going to join tomorrow, putting up posters of hook-nosed Arabs arriving to invade us, they were hard at work. We didn't have a counter message.
Well, I don't think you've noticed, but just next to you, Alan Craig from UKIP, Brexit activist, has just joined us now. I don't know if you were too busy celebrating or stuck in London traffic, Mr. Craig.
London traffic, I'm afraid, but I have been celebrating all day when I've been awake.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much indeed, thank you.
But as Mr. MacShane said, a lot of the campaign was negative and sometimes downright dishonest. 75 million Turkish Muslims invading the United Kingdom. Imminently. You won, and that's great. Congratulations. but do you regret some of the negativity and dishonesty in the campaign?
I was really pleased that so many people engaged in the debate. It was discussed, certainly by the end of it, discussed in pubs and clubs and homes up and down the country. It divided families as well. My own family has fallen out over it as well. But actually that is one of the costs, but also one of the benefits, I can put it, of having a democracy. We saw that in Scotland at the Scottish referendum as well, and we've seen it to a lesser extent. We've seen it in this country, down in the UK and here in London during this particular referendum. I think it's encouraging that people get to grips with the issues. The other thing, it was that for us in the UK, it was a very rapid education in the way that the EU works and all about the EU. Nobody knew anything about the EU. There were faceless bureaucrats at the top of it. Now we all know who Juncker is, Jean-Claude Juncker is, and Donald Tusk and so on.
Faceless bureaucrats, undemocratic. But again, going back to some of the messaging here, so you have Turkey imminently sort of invading the United Kingdom, just blatantly untrue. £350 million on bus ads, right, that will be available every week for the NHS if Britain leaves the EU. Just hours after victory, you have Nigel Farage going, maybe that wasn't really true. Maybe that was a mistake. Do you regret any of that? Because that information informs people's decisions.
I don't think I do regret it, in the sense that, we had the Prime Minister talking in very vague terms about World War III. We had the Chancellor Exchequer saying every household will be £4,300 worse off. That's all part of political debate. It is open to interpretation as to whether it's 350 million quid a week or not.
No, but
it is valid.
But they've just
valid.
said,
It's
they've
valid
said it
to
was
say
a mistake.
that is what you. Well, Boris Johnson is certainly saying it is not a mistake.
Right.
So, like all these things, it's a matter of interpretation of these things. You're dealing with headlines. You use headlines in debate, and when you then start working your way down, you realise it's all about interpretation.
Dennis, it's all about interpretation, and above all, it's a victory for democracy. You have 17.5 million voters, 52% of the country, who can make their decisions for themselves, have decided
Sure,
to vote
and I
this way.
accept that, and I shook Nigel Farage's hand this morning. It's his victory. I mean, we're total opponents, but I've always got on very well with him. He demanded this referendum, David Cameron conceded it. He demanded we get out of Europe. David Cameron allowed the organisation of a very poor campaign for that to happen. So, chapeau, as they say in French, hats off to Nigel. He's now out of a job, but I'm sure he'll be a famous person for as long as the annals of British history are read. I worry a lot, as somebody who supports Turkey, at the enormous damage done to British-Turkish relations by what was a lie. And I got the brochure through my door saying, Turkey set to join the EU, and added in the same map was Syria and Iraq. I mean, why not Afghanistan and Iran?
Europe's border is going to be Syria,
so
right?
That's fundamentally dishonest. I mean, and I tell you something, if you win an election on a lie, Scotland wants to stay in Europe, London wants to stay in Europe, the young want to stay in Europe, the young now are mobilising in Trafalgar Square. Watch it. This isn't over yet.
That's a great point that you make, Dennis, because I want to put this to Alan. So there was a YouGov poll that showed that overwhelmingly young people 18 to, say, 40 voted to remain. The older folk voted to leave overwhelmingly. So have the old voted for a future that the young people don't want?
Well, like these things, it's always open to interpretation. You can put that interpretation if you want onto
What
it.
interpretation?
Another interpretation could be the older. I don't know any older person that is voting for themselves. They're all voting for the future, for their children and their grandchildren. So in that sense, they're not being selfish. They're considering somebody but themselves, whereas the young are being selfish. Now, how about that for a different interpretation? The young are thinking only about me, myself, whereas the older people are thinking, no, one, I've got experience. I know what life was outside the EU as well as inside the EU. I've been around the block a bit, and actually, I'm not interested. I've had my life, so I'm actually more concerned about my children and my grandchildren. It's a matter of interpretation. So I hear the anger of the young, but also the older people have a valid point. It's their country as well. They have their vote, and they also have experience, which the young people don't.
Right. Alan, I was looking at Google Trends, and the most searched for items today after the results. Question number one, what does it mean to leave the EU? This is from within the UK. Second question, what is the EU? So you say there was an education that took place. Are people having second thoughts?
It's a relative thing, isn't it? Right. We knew nothing. We knew absolutely nothing about how the EU works or anything like that. Okay.
Now to leave. Now they're going, oh, what is this stuff?
Actually, do you know why they voted? Because people were angry. People were very, very angry. The disconnect, you've heard it everywhere. People were very angry. They're actually being marginalised. People out there, whether in Bury or Bristol or whatever, they're being marginalised. They're being written out of the script by the establishment over there, but even more the establishment in Brussels, and they've had their voice. And that is what democracy is about. I think it's a wonderful day. I think Farage has got it exactly right. He hasn't complained about all the insults and all the rest of it. For 25 years, he's gone around the country saying we must come out of the EU. His hour has come. We wouldn't be having this referendum if it wasn't for him. We can say one person alone has got us out of the EU. It's a great way for democracy to work. The whole establishment didn't like it. There aren't a lot of countries in the world whereby the establishment, the ordinary person can stick two fingers up at the establishment and get away with it. I think it's wonderful.
Okay, well, Alan talks about anger in Britain. There's also arguably a lot of anger across the European continent. All sorts of nationalistic movements, wondering, should we be doing this as well? Fears in Brussels of what they call contagion. So are we going to see EU member countries vote themselves out one by one? Are we on the brink of seeing a Eurosceptic domino effect? Randolph Nogo has more.
Britain's rocky relationship with the EU has all but crumbled. David Cameron's Remain campaign has been defeated in the UK referendum.
It's a victory against the big merchant banks, against the big businesses, and against big politics.
It's clear now that disagreements within the bloc can't be ignored. Far-right political parties across the continent are gaining popularity. They're taking advantage of a trend towards Euroscepticism as problems grow over debt, large-scale migration, and geopolitical instability to the continent's south and east.
People are angered, people are afraid, people want a different policy. We have a political elite that is not listening to them. That is why parties like mine all over Europe are getting very strong today.
In the Netherlands, Geert Wilders' anti-EU, anti-immigration Party for Freedom is ahead in the race for the next election. It's risen to the equivalent of 41 seats in the 150-member Dutch parliament, up from just 12 seats in 2012. In Germany, the rightist and Eurosceptic Alternative for Deutschland party is more popular than ever. Opinion polls place it a close third, only points behind the center-left Social Democrats, Chancellor Angela Merkel's coalition partner.
I think the Britons have decided for direct democracy.
In Austria's May elections, anti-EU Freedom Party leader Norbert Hofer missed out on the presidency by just 0.6%. Far-right Eurosceptic parties have surged in popularity across Europe.
We failed to notice that ordinary people, the citizens of Europe, do not share our Euro enthusiasm.
While Boris Johnson and his pro-Brexit camp sing a chorus of UK independence, the cracks in a bloc created to unify and strengthen nations are starting to show.
Well, joining us now is Zlatko Lagumdzija. He's the former Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and he joins us live from Sarajevo. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. Are you shocked that this has happened in Britain?
Well, definitely I'm shocked, surprised, call it heavy water, but I'm more sad, if I could put it this way, because I see and I feel, especially standing here in Sarajevo, I mean in Western Balkan, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I see that what was happening in Great Britain last night, this is actually this very clear signal that the world, the Europe, not only Great Britain, is in some kind of a crossroad. Are we going to be connected by hopes, or we are going to be confronted by fears? And it's our choice. People of Great Britain, unfortunately, made their choice to be showing us that the future should be in confrontations, in walls, divisions, not in inclusive, shared societies. My son was telling me before I came here, and we are different generations, he said, Daddy, if it was in our country, I don't think it would be fair that your generation, like in Great Britain, is deciding about our future and they vote to get out, and my generation wanted to stay in and have a future in Great Britain, but in Europe as well, because this is the new world, new for new generation. We shouldn't be going back the way it went over there. But that's up to the people of Great Britain.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I wonder if you think that this will have any impact on Bosnians. Your country is a candidate country to the European Union. Might they have second thoughts and think, hey, why would we want to be a part of a club that the United Kingdom wants to leave?
Well, put it another way around. If 27 countries want to stay in and one country wants to leave, then the conclusion is very self-evident. But I want to underline that Great Britain is a great help, a great friend of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Great Britain was giving us strong support in our construction, nation-building process, and there were initiators together with Germans for new initiative for the region, for Bosnia and Herzegovina. So yes, we will miss that, but at the same time, we have to re-engineer and redo all the stage. I mean, just like Great Britain will have to do. The most important thing is that we want to be EU country, not because our goal is to be in EU. Our goal is to be like every EU country, organized, rule of law, human rights, competitiveness, social security. And after all, I mean, the most important thing is that Bosnia and Herzegovina becomes a country, and it can be done only with the help of its own people. Of course, the friends are welcome, but we have to do our homework. And it's a pity that Great Britain is leaving, but let's hope that this will be, after this greatest earthquake, political earthquake in the last half century in Europe, let's hope that the rest of Europe will wake up, and that the Euro policy of integration and let's say enlargement of the European Union is going to get another new, better, positive speed.
My final question for you, sir, do you hope that perhaps the European Union, given that their situation's fragile now after Britain's voted to leave, do you hope that maybe they might soften some of their prerequisites for candidate countries like Bosnia-Herzegovina?
I don't expect that. The most important thing is that we, the countries of Western Balkan that are in a waiting room, so to speak, for the European Union, that we do our homework, that we use European acquis, European rules and norms, that we use them in order to transform our overall internal institutional system and our countries internally. So that's the most important thing. I don't think that European Union, on the contrary, we can put it another way around. If Great Britain left, I mean, obviously there is more capacity for European Union to be bigger and stronger. And after all, we all know that this is the missing link in European Union, because after all, European Union has to be substantially European. And without Western Balkan being part of European Union is not finished business. And after all, the biggest peace project in the last half century is creation of European Union. This part of the world needs stability and security. And the most important thing is that we have to show that forces of inclusive shared society are winning over the forces of divisions, phobias, and different type of nationalism. Because Europe with nationalism is going to be not only less safe, not only less secure, but it may enter into something which we don't want even to think about.
Okay, Zlatko Lagumdzija, the former Foreign Minister and Prime Minister of Bosnia-Herzegovina, thank you very much for joining us live from Sarajevo there. Alan, Mr. Lagumdzija said that the voices of fear have won here, and this ultranationalism and division is bad for Europe. He's from the Balkans. He would know a thing or two about this. He's on the fringes of Europe trying to get in, and he cannot understand why you would want to leave. Doesn't he have a point?
It's not a day. It's a day of tremendous joy. You know, one of the real... I live and work in the East End of London, okay, that's where I am. One of the real joys for me was working with and realising on the same side as ourselves wanted to come out were established immigrant families from Africa, from South Asia, from the Caribbean. I reckon, I have no proof for it, but I reckon something like 60% of those people from those communities, the established families are here, voted to leave. Why do they vote to leave? Primarily because they see the immigration coming in from Eastern Europe, taking the jobs and putting pressure on their jobs and on their wages. But secondly, because they see the immigration policy, the migration policy of the EU as fundamentally racist. It's giving a preference to the white people. We in the UK, and you, despite all that everybody throws us, we're not the slightest bit racist. We want to be engaged with everybody from completely around the world. Okay, just to finish that point, I seem to see Dennis shaking his head.
Shaking his head,
I live in the East End of London by choice. I live in an area of the East End of London where the white Brits like me are 5% of the population. Right. I like people from around the world. I choose to bring up my family there, and I'm telling you, we're not racist. We want to engage with the rest of the world.
But that 60% figure you can't verify.
I can't verify, but it's certainly substantial. I saw it every day. And I saw them at the polling booths. They're coming, Nigerians and Caribbeans and Asians, shaking, giving us thumbs up, we're voting your way.
Dennis?
It's called pulling up the ladder. It's the most common reflex of any movement of migrants, and both my parents were migrants. That is, you arrive, you make your new home. Anybody else? Oh, no, thank you. In the 1950s, there were posters in the windows of London boarding houses, no coloured, no Irish. In the 1960s, a man called Enoch Powell, this is almost his posthumous victory, raised a torrent of hate against black and African.
I know you're going through a timeline. I just want to ask you very directly. I want to ask you very directly. Was racism a part of this campaign, of UKIP's campaign and the Leave campaign in general, yes or no?
Look at the poster showing hook-nosed Arabs invading Britain that Nigel Farage unveiled. That's straight out of the 1930s. I don't say he's racist, I don't say Alex racist. Look at the poster.
Okay, now we spoke to a former foreign minister and prime minister. I want to move on beyond racism here. We just spoke to a former foreign minister and prime minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina. In general, across Europe, in terms of EU member countries and those who are not, a lot of ministers coming out, speaking out, going, what is going on here? Very surprised. Swedish ambassador to the UK, Nicola Claesson, compared the Brexit vote to a child wanting to pee its pants, saying that, you know, at first it's this idea of sort of warm relief and it's all very nice, but afterwards you're left just wet and cold and full of regret.
Can I ask who's the child here? Who's the childish one here?
That's a pretty fatuous statement. If I know Nicola, frankly, I would not have advised her to make that. And when we had a referendum in Sweden on the euro, that was turned down. Every referendum this century, with Europe on the ballot paper, has been rejected, or there's been no to Europe. Mr. Cameron might have thought about that, but he's lost his job now.
Okay, I've got to come in here and I've got to thank Alan Craig because I've got to go to a break. We'll be back after the break, but Alan Craig, thank you very much for joining us. Dennis MacShane, stay where you are. Stay with us. We'll be back after this short break.